Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Amanda Boyce, Australian pronunciation coach based in India. And she started her business Aussie English with Amanda from scratch in India, building one-to-one coaching programs that help skilled migrants in Australia speak clearly and confidently at work. So we learned about that, and we'll also learn from her why tonality matters more than accent, how Australian and American English differ in ways most training ignores, and what she's learned about culture, language, and starting over while building her life between two countries. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Ajay. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Amanda. And since you are in India, for the international, audience and my experts, I always tell them welcome to India. But you are in India, but still welcome to India in this particular form, because you are carving a niche and your place in this part of the world. So welcome to that. And so we'll be talking about, as we talked about, how to speak clearly and confidently at work. We'll talk about all this, but let's first talk a bit about your journey, your background, your story, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. So as you said, I am Australian and I live in India. So I have been living in Chandigarh, North India for almost 7 years. I moved here in June 2019 to get married. My husband is Indian. So I moved here in June. We got married in November. And then a few months later, coronavirus started. So my first couple of years here in India was during the pandemic. And as you probably remember, the lockdowns were very tough here. So I also couldn't work during the first few years because of my visa restrictions. I was not allowed to work. And then eventually, when I was able to work, I decided to look for something online. And eventually I found a company online where I could teach English. So I applied, I was accepted, and I started to teach English online. After some time, I found that people were booking me because I'm Australian. And they would say things how they couldn't understand the slang, the accent, Australian culture. And I thought, you know what, there is something here. I think that there is a market here that I can, with a gap in the market, and I can fill that gap. So that's what I did. And I started Aussie English with Amanda almost 3 years ago. I'm coming up to my 3-year business anniversary or 3-year birthday. And yeah, it's just been an incredible experience. And I've been doing all of that here from my home office in India with no connections really, all by myself with the help of my husband. And here I am.
Here you are, Amanda. So for an international audience, generally people who are looking at this part of the world to sell their services, goods, to reach this part of the world for so many things, and to also learn from here. And also, from here to outside and outside to India, I want to understand, how do you like to tell the world what you are trying to do? Because there is a market for this everywhere, where people want to reach a particular place and they know English, but they look at it in a very different manner. Help us understand from that perspective, for the Indian audience as well as for the global audience.
Absolutely, yes. So I will just preface this by saying my clients are not just Indian. I don't market my services here in India because I help skilled professionals or skilled migrants in Australia. It just so happens that half of my students or half of my clients are actually Indian anyway, but they all live in Australia. So my main focus now is helping skilled migrants improve their pronunciation to build confidence and to speak clearly in the workplace. Most of my, in a marketing term, leads. Most of my students or inquiries come through Instagram and social media. So that's sort of that part of my business, but I am wanting to look at expanding in India in a different market, helping Australian companies specifically with Australian English, workplace culture, Australian accent here in India.
Absolutely. So, Amanda, for those people who are, say, going out of India to Australia or from any other part of the world to Australia or maybe anywhere else, what is it that they need to know beyond knowing English? They do
Mm-hmm.
know, they must be knowing some English. Maybe they have to
Yes.
fine tune it. But where do you come
Mm-hmm.
into the picture? Where do they find that you can help them?
Yeah. So English is different everywhere. So in India, there's Indian English, which is a very, very broad term for the English spoken here in the country. In
Right.
Australia, there's Australian English. In the UK, they have British English. So English can change a little bit region to region. So besides knowing the language, you also have to understand differences in communication and cultural communication. You need to understand slang and informal language, especially in Australia. Not that you have to use it if you don't want to, but you need to understand these specific words and phrases. Otherwise, it's going to be very confusing for you if you don't know them. I think the main difference between Australia and India in terms of communication is that Australian communication is very direct, whereas here in India, it's seen as quite rude to be direct and say no straight up. Whereas in Australia, that's actually normal and it's sort of expected, and it doesn't mean that someone's being rude by saying no. It's just that they're being very direct and clear. Understanding that these differences in communication exist is really important.
Absolutely. How does that impact someone in the workplace? For especially for someone who is going from outside, Australia, someone who is an immigrant to Australia, and as you said, more than half of your students are, from India itself. So from that example, or from anywhere else, from that who is coming to Australia.
Yeah. So if we use my example about how saying no directly can be considered rude here in India or in any country where indirect communication is preferred. Let's say you ask your boss for something and they directly tell you no, but in a polite way because tone matters. You might get offended, think that maybe you are being targeted or singled out because you're being told no. Whereas in fact, the manager's just being honest and direct. So that's one example. Another example would be, I think, the opposite side. So if you keep saying yes to your boss, if your boss asks you to do all of these tasks and you're feeling scared to say no because it's considered rude, you could get overwhelmed with all of these activities and tasks and being delegated work. Whereas you could easily just say no in a polite way. Right now is not the best time. Can I do it tomorrow? Is it possible to do it next week? Can we have the meeting at this time instead and offer alternatives?
Right, right, Amanda. Now, saying no to boss is also can also be difficult for Australians living in Australia talking to an Australian boss. A lot of problems nowadays are about burnout, about saying yes to almost everything because you can't say no to. How do you then, amid such a work culture, many a times people are calling it toxic work culture, you go from outside and then you learn that these guys like things to be said directly, and you start speaking directly without understanding the nuance of where you stand in terms of your work situation, and then you will be getting fired because in the same situation an Australian person will not say yes, no, but you are, and then you will come out as as they say, sticking like a sore thumb.
Yes, yeah. Understanding the nuances, like you said, is actually really important in this situation, because there are ways to politely say no and offer alternatives instead. Some things you might have to say yes if it's a part of your duty and a part of your tasks. Other things, though, it's a skill that you can learn to how to politely say no or redirect, and offer suggestions or alternatives. If you just say no, sorry, boss, I can't do it, that's very different to right now I have a lot of work going on, or right now is not a good time, but I can do it by this day instead, or by this time, because you're offering a suggestion or an alternative. It's very different than just saying no and not offering that.
Right. Some people might understand, when you go to another country, you have to adopt and adapt to their accent. And
Mm,
you talk about, that it's much more than that. Clarity, confidence, and
hmm.
all in that. Help us
Yeah.
understand, how should people understand this part of it? Generally, people think if I
Hmm.
sound like them, I will be like them, because I already know English.
Mm,
Some part of English you already know. Maybe Indians speak
yeah.
more of Queen's English, and Australia
Mm.
different. Maybe they. How is that different here? Help us understand with this a couple of things.
Yeah. So I think to answer that, I just want to answer that with a different question, in the sense that there's a difference between accent and pronunciation. So, accent is
Okay.
what you sound like, and sort of the overall pattern of sound, including your melody, rhythm, and stress. Pronunciation is how you say words, how you articulate the sounds, syllables, and words. So, they're very similar, but you don't have to change your accent to improve your pronunciation. And I think there is that kind of misconception that you need to change your accent to fit in. A lot of the time, you just need to improve your pronunciation to sound clearer. The clearer you are, the less times people are going to be asking you, sorry, can you repeat that? I can't understand you. Can you say that again? The more times that happens, it affects your self confidence, right? So the less time that happens because you've improved pronunciation, in turn, it's going to improve your confidence, because people aren't asking you to repeat yourself. You're being understood the first time. So knowing how to pronounce words clearly and properly and effectively, mix that in with things like tonality, your rhythm, the way that you sound when talking. And that's what it comes down to with pronunciation training, and how it can help you in the workplace.
Right, right, Amanda. So when you teach, what is it that you teach? How does your,
Mm.
teaching and learning from the students, how does this all look like? Especially for people who say, I know English, but this is a different
Mm.
nuance altogether. Help us understand from
Yeah.
that thing from the ground.
Yeah, definitely. So, as I said before, I've got one program, and it's a pronunciation program. So, I'm very specific about what I do and what I don't do in my programs. If someone wants to improve their general fluency, like free talking or just speaking practice, improve their grammar and vocabulary, I don't do that. So, I focus specifically on pronunciation, with pronunciation being the main topic or focus point. So I do an assessment before we begin the 12 weeks, where I analyze a person's speech patterns, pronunciation, and accent. Based on that, I create a personalized 12-week plan. Every week we focus on a different area, whether it's a sound, whether it is a type of rhythm or stress. And then I personalize that lesson, the speaking component, around their job, their occupation, their workplace, to make it very specific. So the first half of that lesson is all about how you make the sound. The second half is where we implement it. And so every week changes like that, but it is completely personalized all around the pronunciation side of things. So, yeah, as I said, if someone comes and says, oh, I want to get better vocabulary, my main focus is grammar, I don't do that. So I say, sorry, you'll have to find someone else, because my main program is pronunciation focused. I will correct grammar as it comes up, but I'm not going to create a whole lesson around grammar.
Absolutely. Generally, people think, that it's only the way people speak is different. English is almost the
Mm,
same. Maybe people think
yeah.
that Americans use different not pronunciation, but yes, some words pronunciation, but mostly different
Yeah.
spellings. But more or less, it is
Yeah.
still the same. But if I understand,
Yeah.
Australian English is different, American English is different, and Queen's English
Hmm.
is in its own zone altogether.
Yeah. Yes. So they are all types of accents because it's how you sound. It's what you sound like. So, yes, in Australia, Australian English, there are roughly 3 different types of accents. In America, they have, I don't know how many, but they have a lot. And same in the UK. So, the Queen's English or King's English is just one accent out of many there. So, there's one type of Australian accent that's very similar to the King or Queen's English. So I think a lot of people go to Australia and find it very similar sounding to British English. However, a lot of migrants go to Australia having only learnt American English and American English spelling at school or growing up, or had only exposure to Hollywood movies. So they struggle when they get to Australia because of the accent.
Absolutely. How was your transition like? Here it was other way around. Means you have to use your understanding of things as well as make sure that others are also understanding it in
Yeah.
the way you want them to understand. How has been? Was it a struggle?
Yeah.
Was it easy for you to understand as well as to be understood?
Mm. So I'm actually learning Hindi. मैं हिंदी सीख रही हूँ.
Right.
So I'm learning Hindi because I have to. Even though I live in Chandigarh, I live on the outskirts of Chandigarh. So my area, not a lot of people speak English, or they're not very confident in English. My husband's parents also don't speak English. So I wanted to build a relationship with them. So I'm learning the language. It's also really important to me as a part of integrating into the community and adapting to the culture in the country to learn the local language around me. When I do speak English, though, I use Indian English pronunciation for this reason, because people struggle to understand my Australian accent because of lack of exposure to it. So I know what changes I have to make in my speech to make me understood for better communication. And that means using Indian English pronunciation when I talk.
Absolutely. And that is where I come to the other part of your business talk about you are now expanding into Indian market, supporting Australian companies that work closely with teams in India. So here, does it mean that the Australians will start speaking Indian English to be understood better? How does that work?
So the main goal here is to help the Indian teams who are servicing Australian customers. So improving their kind of pronunciation and their understanding of the culture, because as a business, they're working with Australian customers, clients, and colleagues. However, I have been approached by companies to help give training to the Australian colleagues on Indian culture and communications to help them understand as well. So it does work in both ways, but my main work predominantly would be to help the Indian teams understand Australian culture because their customers are Australian. It would be different if it was the Australian team who had Indian customers, then that's what the focus would be. But because the Indian teams are their actual customers are Australians, it's to help them
Right.
understand the direct cultural communication we were just talking about before and all of those aspects. Understand how Australians speak so that they can listen and understand them and remove that barrier to communication.
Right. Where does accent stand? Whichever accent it is, Indian, Australian, amidst all this, this whole juggle to find clarity in your communication. Should you
Mm.
maintain it? Should you keep it? Should you lose it? What happens to accent?
This is a really tricky one because I think it comes down to 2 things. It comes down to personal preference, but then also maybe who you're working for. Because if a company If a company actually requires it, then that's a bit different. But like most of my students come to me and they don't want to change their accent. That's completely fine. We work on improving their pronunciation and how they sound, or the words they say, sorry, so that it helps improve their communication. Now, there are a few things that you can do to start off with if you find that you are having some barriers to communication. And the first one I always recommend is to just practice slowing down to begin with. Because if you talk fast and you have an accent that's different to what the listener is used to, those two combined can make it very tricky. Because not only is the person trying to understand your pronunciation and way of speaking, but if you're speaking too fast, their brain's working overtime. So slow down first, give them time to process what you're saying to understand your accent.
Right, right, Amanda. What's the lesson here for global leaders, especially teams which are, spread across different, geographies in today's time? Many are working across, working from home in different places. You get good talent, but every time the talent does not come with the type of or nuanced clarity that you want. How should leaders understand this opportunity, but as well as the challenge in terms of communication?
I think they have to be aware that differences in communication exist. I'm just going to keep going back to direct and indirect communication as an example. But you have to understand that, I guess, understand the communication of the country of where your staff is coming from or the client you're working with. Know that these differences exist, understand them yourself, and teach your staff about these differences in communication, and know that just because something is different, it doesn't make it wrong. It's just different. And understanding will take you so far, and having that compassion that, yes, these differences exist, and it's okay.
Absolutely. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen that, a lot of countries which speak, even if they know English, many a times they prefer to speak in their own language, either in Japan, Germany, or other places, which is fine and which is good in their own way. A lot of the Western companies, they take extra preparation, understanding to not only understand their language, they also take a translator, interpreter, but also to understand the nuance. With India,
Yeah.
especially with people who already know English, they don't as much go and understand that nuance of the culture, but rather expect them to fine tune everything to their needs, even if they are a client themselves or Indians themselves are the client. How do you see this? Do you think they have to catch up and understand Indians, especially in a global market, expanding market, the way they are, and rather than, making them the way they want them to be? How do you see that now that you have experience in India?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, again, needs to be a little bit more understanding as well that that India is such a multicultural country in itself, isn't it? Every state, every region has its own like subculture. And I think there's this misconception outside of India that when you hear Indian culture, it's one culture, right? Like in Australia, Australian culture is like one thing. But I don't think a lot of people realize just how multicultural India is inside. It's like when I speak to people who aren't familiar with India and I say I live here, and they say, "Are you learning Indian?" And it's like, "Well, I'm learning Hindi, which is a Indian language, but Indian is not a language." And it's just this kind of misconception that they just don't know. I think there needs to be more, probably, education around that too.
Absolutely. So, Amanda, where is it that you want to reach with what you are doing at the moment?
As in my like Australia side of the business, or what I'm doing here in India?
Yeah, both sides. The way you are looking at, expanding your operations, where you want to be, where is it that you want to reach in terms of business wise?
Yeah. Well, India is my home. This is where I plan to live long term. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted just to explore the opportunity of expanding here. Um, I haven't thought too far ahead, which is not very business minded of me, but I just know that I have, I think, a very specific skill set in terms of, and my situation in terms of me being an Australian English teacher, an accent coach, understanding Australian culture. And India's booming. India's just going to keep getting busier and busier and better with, international trade and communications. And I think there needs to be someone to help bridge that gap in communication to make it easier. So that is something that I'm wanting to explore.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so much to learn about all this from you, Amanda, and I'm sure a lot of
Thank
people,
you.
not only in India but also from other countries, who want to travel, go to Australia and work there, or for anywhere else. What's the best way for
Mhm.
them to connect with you?
Uh, Depends. I think probably LinkedIn because I'm less busy over there. Otherwise, I'm on all social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok for those people outside of India. But I also have my website, AussieEnglishWithAmanda.com. You can contact me on there as well. So that or LinkedIn.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the
Thank
KAJ
you.
Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.